understand why I would be attracted to self-defense. If you told me 20 years ago that I would make my life about having people have the basics of self-protection, not only as a personal right, but as a global human right, I would have said, you're nuts! Of course, I had thought of taking a self-defense class, but it was on a long list at the very bottom, somewhere underneath, organize my sock drawer or get a Brazilian hot wax. So at 47 was take a self-defense class. However, that shifted dramatically, and it went right to the top because of an event that changed my life. My husband and I, my husband then, came home at midnight to a restored Craftsman house 3 blocks east of MacArthur Park. Now, for those of you who know Los Angeles, MacArthur Park, 20 years ago rather, was a drug dealer's haven and the place where a lot of the deported criminally insane from Cuba hung out. So my husband noticed we had a break-in, and he said, honey, stay in the car, I'll handle it. So he had been raised to be protective, and I had been raised to be protected. But what the heck was he going to do once he got in the house? All the training he'd had in any kind of martial art or whatever was high school wrestling. And certainly not wrestling anybody that was criminally insane that happened to break into our house. So I shook myself out of my reverie, and I went, I just sent my beloved husband into a dark house 3 blocks east of MacArthur Park. What am I thinking? So I went into the house. As I crossed the threshold, a man in a ski mask came walking up the basement stairs and held up a knife and was ready to plunge it into me. As they say, time stopped. The streetlight glinted off the blade, and I listened to a little voice in my head which said, do something, do it now, and I screamed so loudly. The man dropped the knife, grabbed his ears, and ran like hell. Now, I had employed the only self-protection that I'd ever seen a woman use up to that point, which was a scream. Now, that's no little thing. DB levels, your basic rock concert is 115, your 747 taking off is 140, my scream is 130. I told the cops after they came, I said, if you go to the emergency rooms and look for a man with bleeding ears, you have your suspect. Now, my husband was fine. He heard my scream, however, and he didn't know whether he was going to come down to find me dead or alive. Now, fortunately, I was very much alive, but it started my obsession with wondering, why was I so clueless about violence? Why were we both so clueless? If we'd had any kind of personal safety training at all, neither one of us would have gone into that house. We would have gotten into the car, backed up, and gone to a police station. But we weren't thinking, and what we did is we went into a default mode of rigid gender roles, where he would save me and I would be saved, right? So it also started this obsession with understanding my ignorance. Here I was. I'm a privileged person. I'm well-read, well-traveled. I have a law degree. I passed the California bar exam. I come from a loving family. I've had nothing but really loving partners. But not once did one person ever say to me, here's what you should do in case you are confronted with somebody who's violent. I thought that was really weird, but I had not thought about it before. So I set about researching how-to books. There were quite a few of those, but there weren't any why books or how come. How come? If I'm also very keyed into the violence against women, did I not know anything about stopping it right before or during it? Why was I left out of that equation? So I had to follow Toni Morrison's advice, which is if there's a book you really want to read, but it hasn't been written yet, then you must write it. So I should thank the man with the knife. Because of him, I wrote Beauty Bites Beast, which explores science, religion, all the different lenses you can look at women's self-defense through. And then I broadened my commitment to universal self-defense because I believe it's everybody's right to know how to protect themselves. I also found Impact Personal Safety, which delivers a full force, full impact self-defense class. And there are different self-defenses. I'm not putting that down, but I started to wonder, if I had come close to drowning, what would I want to do? Before I get into that, though, before I took this class with Impact, I read testimonials that sounded like religious conversions. They said, I wish I had this as a kid. I want everyone in my life to do this. My life transformed. Why didn't I do this earlier? My life changed. And yet, I didn't know about it? Isn't that odd? So I thought, okay, so let's say if I had come close to drowning, I wouldn't find a book, learn how to swim. I would find a pool. And I would find people who know how to swim to teach me. So, with that, I'd like to welcome my colleague, who is supposedly in the back of the room. Yes, here he is. This is Fred Saricchio. Come on forward. Now, he is going to free my pool for the afternoon, and I'm going to demonstrate a common form of confrontation that we teach our graduates to handle.
Hey!
Stop! Stop right there! Stop!
Hey!
Stop! Don't come any closer! Don't come any closer!
All you rich people are the same!
I'm sorry.
Yeah, too bad, thanks for nothing.
So, before I'd taken any of these classes, I would have been so frozen, which, by the way, is people's deepest fear, that they'll freeze when anything violent happens. Now, we overtrain our students to plan for the worst, but because of their verbal skills being so high, because they know if push comes to shove, they can handle anything, or almost anything, we overtrain them so that they know what it's like to actually get in a fight. And boy, one thing you find out is men are flesh and blood just like everybody else. Okay, so let's say he's been goaded on to something else after our verbal exchange.
Hey, my brother-in-law said you are the bitch fighter. Make me look like a fool.
Don't come any closer.
I'm gonna make you
don't have to
pay.
do this. No! 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 Look! Like that. 911. All right. So, Fred, by the way, is actually a rocket scientist. And our staff and graduates includes a lot of physicists and a lot of rocket scientists, because they are accustomed to not only being picked on as kids usually, but because they go into the deeper questions and look for the answers. Now, he's also, since he's so high-tech during the day, he's also low-tech. Defending your body is the lowest tech there is, but it is tech. Thank you so much. Great. So we teach in 5 private schools now in Southern California, because a lot of educators and a lot of parents know that their kids need to know about what to do with a potentially violent situation when they get out into the world. Hopefully this will be available from grade school on. What we see is people walk into our classes one way and walk out another. One of my fondest wishes is to have neuroscience do tests on people's brains before our class and after our class. We see a fundamental shift in how the people carry themselves. Any brain researchers here? Roll me. So, why do people wait until something scares them so much they finally decide to take a self-defense class? Why do we depend on tragedy? I like to frame this conversation in a literacy format. People are afraid, and they're basically physically illiterate. The common usage is competence or knowledge in a specified area, mostly having to do with reading and writing. But I want to know, in this audience, how many of you can read and write? Raise your hands. Okay, it's 100%. Now, we laugh, but if I'd asked an audience this size even 100 years ago, I wouldn't have had that many people raise their hands. My own grandfather could read and write in Norwegian, but he couldn't read and write in English. So you can see that literacy is on a continuum and shifts with the commitment of society or the community generally. Now, and I want you to see a show of hands. How many of you know what to do if you're confronted with a violent person? Raise your hand. That's pretty good. Pretty good, but I would say it's about 5% of the audience. So I'm about shifting that. So you have the very basics in what to do if something happens, including not going into a dark house. Okay? So, we are physically literate in lots of different ways. We, for instance, use seatbelts. That wasn't always a given. I remember my dad would throw us in the car and we would be sliding around on that bench seat like little peas in a very loose pod. We are literate about food preparation. We know we need to wash our hands. We need to use antibacterial stuff because food can kill, cars can kill. We get water safety classes so we don't drown. And it's reasonable to say that swimming classes is self-defense against water, right? So why the ignorance? Partially because well-meaning adults often tell the gentlest of us, the girls and the geeks, when we're bullied or we have to confront a mean or violent child on the playground, we get 3 pieces of advice. Ignore him or her. Then we get a second piece of advice, which is ignore him or her. And then we get a third piece of advice, which is ignore him or her. 3 ignores equals ignorance. Another way of saying illiteracy. Now the thing is, bullies know that they are merely flesh and blood. They're merely flesh and blood. And the FBI says that in 2010, an estimated 1,246,248 violent crimes occurred nationwide. Now they also know that over 50% of crimes aren't even reported. So people are out there dealing with other violent people, whether it's because you're in the healthcare profession, you're dealing with somebody who's not on their meds, or street crime. And we're surrounded by violence. How many of you have been impacted by violence? Just raise your hands, whether it's personally or loved ones. That is a pretty big showing. So, we really don't prepare for violence, really? That kind of doesn't make any sense. Bless you. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Now, the meek aren't going to inherit anything if we continue to allow bullies to run everything. And if we don't learn the basics in saying no and enforcing a no if we have to, we're going to have the forceful people running everything. Think globally. Act locally. Is there anything more local than your body? I can't think of anything new. Bless you. I would like to have you consider this. Sic parvis magnus, which is Latin for from little comes much, is the underpinning of vaccination. We give people a little tiny amount of the virus in order for them to build their immune system. I'm here to say that to give the meek and the geek self-defense classes is a form of vaccination. If we don't have more gentle people in decision-making, at the table, whether the table is local or global, in peacemaking negotiations, all over the world, we're going to have the loudest and the meanest running things. Now, one of the things that end violence initiatives often leave out is what to do right before or during an incident. And that is tragic, because some people, if they knew the simplest thing, like take dirt and throw it in the perpetrator's eyes, that just might be the little opening that he or she needs to escape this assault. Predators depend on their sight. And that's a very simple thing that you can take away. Even the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the 3rd article says, everyone has a right to life, liberty, and security of person. Maslow talks about the basic needs of food, shelter, and security. We hardly ever talk about security. Now, I have people say, but women are so much smaller, they can't possibly take on a larger, meaner man. Well, I don't think I agree with that. And I'm going to suggest that the ability and the drive to defend oneself is not gendered. It is just not gendered. And I'm going to pose a hypothetical. If you were walking down the street and you saw a small, rabid dog, you would ask yourself some questions. Can I get away from this dog? Can I outrun this dog? Or you might even say, is that dog rabid or is that whipped cream on its face? But I'll guarantee you, you would not say, is this a male or a female? If it's a female, I'm not afraid of it. I don't think so. I don't think so. Now, consider this hypothetical. Let's say that mom dogs were trained somehow to segregate male puppies from female puppies. Okay, male puppies, you go over here, have fun, roll around, test your limits, bite each other, see how far you can go, and you can see what your limits are. Oh, and girl puppies, you go over here, look pretty, don't get your fur dirty, and don't make any noise unless you're cheering for the boys. You can really see how within a generation, we'd have kind of nutty dog moms, and they'd be raising nutty dog puppies, right? So, the Chinese have a saying that the Temple of Enlightenment is guarded by two lions, the lion of confusion and the lion of paradox. One of the greatest paradox of teaching self-defense to people is that we teach you to defend yourself so you won't have to. Your verbal skills will go way up, and most of the time you can handle things verbally. I'm going to end with the experience I had in Osaka, Japan, coming back from the United Nations Conference on Women in Beijing. My roommate and I were the only North Americans in the train station. A man in his 70s or 80s was very drunk and very mad at me for being American, and he came reeling toward me. He was obviously very drunk, and he's screaming at me, and I go, "Stop! Back up!" Well, that just stopped him in his tracks, and he didn't know what to do, so he found some other people, 4 schoolgirls. He reeled over to them, and they just looked down at the ground and giggled. Before he got all the way over to him, I said, "Leave them alone!" which brought him back to me, at which point I went, "No!" Now, he was really confused. He went back to the schoolgirls, and they, in unison, went, "No!" All the women in the train station applauded. Now, what I learned from that is that ideas are contagious and transcend language and custom. The desire to be left alone by mean people is universal. And a little bit of boundary setting goes a long way. I hope I have changed your view of self-defense, and please get yourself literate in physical self-defense. Thank you.